Good morning and welcome everyone to Apogee's latest webinar in our Evolve series. Thank you for joining us this morning. Today, we're joined by cybersecurity experts MyEmpire, and we've got guest speaker Alex, who will do an introduction in a minute, joining over from Melbourne. So thank you for joining us despite the conflicting time zones. He's going to provide a quick security 101, and there'll be plenty of time for a Q&A on anything that Alex raises throughout the presentation. Whilst we wait for everybody to join the webinar, I'm just going to play a short introductory video.
In a world of constant change, we're here to help businesses work smarter and work safer. Creating a workplace for your employees to work collaboratively, anywhere, anytime, whilst keeping your workforce secure to protect your business. Our managed workplace services focus on people, process, and technology, with the aim to maximize financial efficiency, enhance customer experience, and reduce environmental impact, all whilst keeping your employees engaged and productive. As an independent subsidiary of HP, Apogee combines its 30 years of experience with the advantage of being part of one of the world's most secure, sustainable, and innovative companies. Combining the latest technology and workplace services with our market-leading customer support, our clients can take control of their digital journey, driving business and employee efficiencies whilst aligning to ESG goals. Work with us. You won't even know we're here.
So just a quick agenda and housekeeping for today. So we're going to have a quick introduction to following on from the video on how Apogee help businesses work smarter and work safer. Be a quick introduction to Alex, who will then run through, as he said, a security 101, looking at common security issues that businesses face, how we can organizations can protect themselves, and some key principles from joining frameworks, accreditations, etc. And as I said, please feel free to ask questions as we go. There is a Q&A functionality, or there's a specific time at the end, or if there's any personal questions that you may want to ask, there'll be an opportunity we can share details, and we'll be happy to arrange a follow-up call afterwards. So just FYI, this session will be recorded. If there's any parts of it you wish to share afterwards, we can share that link with you. So Apogee is an organisation. We're here to ultimately help businesses work smarter and work safer in a more sustainable world. What does that really mean? Following on from the video a minute ago, we focus on three key areas. We focus on people, that's your employees. We look at the day-to-day roles, how we can motivate, empower people. Ultimately, we want businesses to have a workforce that is productive, efficient, and of course, secure. When we look at the people, that naturally evolves into how they work, the processes that they use, the day-to-day tasks that they undertake, and is an awful lot still of manual tasks and processes that people still undertake on a daily basis. So we look at how we can make the complicated simple, and optimize that operational efficiency within a business. And typically, when you start to bring the people and process together, you need some form of technology. So that we look at that as the digital enabler that brings people and process together. So us as an organization, as you can see, we're owned by HP. We're an independent subsidiary, so we're very fortunate to be able to lean on HP, the technology, etc., that they provide. And then we work with key partners like MyEmpire to ensure that the solutions that we provide are the most secure on the market. So ultimately, why do we do this? We listen to our customers, we understand their worlds, and ultimately we want to deliver some key benefits. One of those is an optimal workplace. As we said before, making sure those employees can work collaboratively anywhere, anytime, embracing that hybrid world that we currently live in. One of the key focuses of today, keeping workforces compliant and secure. It's a top priority for many organisations as we move even further into a digital world. Maximising financial efficiency. Again, critically important, especially when we've gone through the recent economic ups and downs and challenges in recent years. How can we ensure organisations remain profitable? And ultimately, that's a core goal for us as well. And your customer. Who are your customers, and how can we ensure that the solutions we provide enhance their experience so you gain and maintain a competitive edge? And hopefully we can do all of that whilst relating things back to organisations' ESG goals and reducing the impact on the environment. So as an organisation, we see ourselves as a managed workplace services provider. This is our wider portfolio, and today we're not going to sit and talk around everything that we do. It's not an Apogee show and tell of our portfolio. We're going to really specifically look at number 5 there on the left-hand side and cybersecurity. But if you are new to Apogee or your existing customer weren't aware that we had such a wide portfolio, please do get in contact with your account manager or any one of us, and we can explain a little bit more around any one of the different services that we provide, all of which sort of have that wraparound, that security that we have from being part of HP, and a market-leading service support, which is growing across the UK and into Europe. So, without further ado, I will pass over to Alex, who can introduce himself and hopefully a bit of an introduction to how MyEmpire and Apogee started their journey together.
Thanks, Dom, and hi everyone. Thanks for joining this morning. It's great to be here. Just by way of, I guess, that initial introduction, and I'm not sure who's on the call, but you may have seen me speak previously at Apogee events. But my background in cybersecurity actually started way back having a web services business which got hit by a cyber attack back in 2011. And without going into the depth of that particular incident, essentially from that incident, a lot of learnings and then a lot of consulting in the process. So one of the things that we did with MyEmpire and we established was cybersecurity focused on primarily around the remediation, the uplift capability. We want to be part of the solution rather than just coming in and giving you a report that says where your problems are. So that's sort of fundamental to us, but that's fundamental to the background of where we came from and how we got into this space. And I think there's some alignment there with Apogee and the way they work. And Dom just mentioned people, process, and technology. As I work through this presentation, that concept will come into this quite a few times, you'll find, and you'll see, I think, hopefully a lot of alignment. So I'm going to go about this slightly differently for a security presentation. Those who have heard security vendors and consultants speak in the past, the starting point is normally the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We'll come and tell you the horror stories and then tell you a solution to solve those. We've been providing virtual CISO services and acting as CISOs for organisations for many years across the team. And we sat down recently and we mapped out what are the biggest issues that we see consistently across clients. And this is across geographics as well. And we came up with the 6 that you see on screen. So I thought I'd start by talking through what we see people doing wrong or poorly and focusing on, and then work through what a program could or should look like to establish strong cyber resilience. Not overly technical in nature, and you'll see again as I go through that a lot of these are governance, risk and compliance focused conversation points, and you'll also see that a lot of them overlap each other. The first one there, visibility, number one issue, almost 100% of the time that we see within organisations is that most companies actually struggle to tell us what they have, where it is, who's looking after it, how it's protected, what data's in there, the sensitivity and importance of that data, what external connections that system may have. Basically, they don't know their own landscape, and it's very, very hard, of course, to secure an organisation and provide a resilient security posture when you don't have clear visibility. So that's always the starting point for us. So getting a strong understanding of the technical scope, but also the business context. Because if you don't understand that scope or context, you're probably not going to really understand where your risks are and where your blind spots are. And so that's often the biggest issue we find, that people come into, or organisations come into it, having a very limited view of what their issue is because of a limited view of exactly what they have. The best example I can give of that is cloud applications, all the websites we log into. It's amazing when we start to unpack that with clients, how long that list actually is. But normally that's not known until some diligence around auditing what we're actually using, what we've subscribed to, what we're paying for, what we're sharing our data into is actually mapped out. The next one ties nicely into that one, which is the access management. Again, probably equal biggest issue, which is inconsistent application of policy or no policies at all around how we manage access to our systems and to our software and to our cloud applications. Often very inconsistent application of good passwords. Often no provision of password management solutions, which means a lot of users are just either reusing passwords or they're storing them in spreadsheets or on documents or in workbooks. And inconsistent application of multi-factor authentication. And again, often the first argument or counter argument to that we will get is that I've turned on multi-factor for my 365 environment, Microsoft 365 environment. But when you go through that visibility, that mapping exercise, and you start to realise all of the systems and all of the assets that you have, suddenly you start to get a sense of how inconsistent your access management actually is. So that's definitely one of the big two. The next one along takes a slightly different look at the issue, and we often hear that the primary question or driver for somebody coming to us asking for assistance with their cybersecurity, and I'll quote the sentence we hear the most common is, what's the minimum I need to do to meet the requirements of X? And X very often is Cyber Essentials. And Cyber Essentials as a framework, and I'll touch on framework shortly, but Cyber Essentials as a framework is fantastic. And as the name suggests, it is the essentials. It's the fundamental technical elements that you need to have in place to protect your core technology assets. So it is a technical focused or a technically focused framework. But a lot of the time what we get is the question of what's the minimum I need to do just to get that tick, to get that certificate. And that compliance focus provides that, or then provides that false sense of security. And a lot of organisations, when we speak to them, they say, we're okay because we've got Cyber Essentials, which fundamentally means that they probably don't have visibility of their entire risk and their cybersecurity risk. But outside of Cyber Essentials, it could be, I've got a contract, I just need to make sure I can tick the requirements of this contract so that I'm compliant, or I've received the insurance questionnaire from the cyber insurers and I need to make sure I can say yes to these things, or the customer risk questionnaire, or some other certification framework like ISO 27001. But taking that compliance focus, if that's the driver, my first ask for anyone is please do a reset and think about risk first, and then draw the compliance in. You'll get a significantly better outcome if you come at it from a risk-focused approach than a compliance-focused approach. But to do that, you need to understand scope and context, which is that first point. The next one is the tech focus. Toys, I say toys won't always stop accidentally sending something with personal information to the wrong recipients. So we can't use technology always to prevent human error. The security tools are not infallible, so they will never 100% stop a hacker, a motivated attacker getting through. So one of the biggest issues we see, one of these big issues we see is organisations just throwing money at technology because they think it's going to solve what they think is their problem. been sold very well by the vendors, or it's the topic of the day. And a great example at the moment is the SIEM solutions for monitoring security incidents. So the issues are kind of twofold. One is vendor marketing. Obviously, there's strong marketing that you need these technology solutions to protect your business. But there's a lot of noise. So a lot of vendors create a lot of noise and then create a lot of drive, of course, to invest in those solutions. As an example, there's a researcher in the US called Richard Steinen who publishes an annual security yearbook. And I think at last count, the last book had about 4,000 security vendors. That's software and hardware vendors providing technology solutions to solve the security problem across a range of different topics. And one good example, there's about 400 in that list that provide governance, risk and compliance management platforms for cybersecurity. So there's this vast array of technology solutions, and I think that's flooding the market or drowning out the messaging that cybersecurity is broader than just technology. But what we see is a lot of organisations just dive straight in headfirst into buying all of the tools that they think they need to protect against the risks that they think they have. I mentioned the SIEM solutions, and I'll deviate a little bit on this just to explain this concept a bit more. We often get the first inquiry from clients often is, I need to put a SIEM. So a SIEM, for those that aren't aware, is a security information and event monitoring platform. So it's think of it as a central place to push all of your security logs that then runs rules over it and then raises an alarm if it thinks you may have a situation to deal with, an event or an incident to deal with. So a lot of companies will come to us and say, we need to get a SIEM and we need to get security monitoring done. But they haven't actually put all of the other processes in place. They haven't defined their business use cases. They don't actually know what a security incident may or may not look like for their business. They don't know what's relevance for them. So often what happens is they'll invest in a SIEM solution, and they're not cheap solutions, and then about a year later realise that they haven't actually got any value from it. So coming at it purely thinking I need to put technology in place to solve my problem is doomed for a bit of failure, in that it's probably doomed for an investment in something you may or may not get value out of if it isn't done at the right time for the right purpose. The other thing to call out with technology is these tools need to be maintained. And the one thing worse than having no solution is one that's not implemented or maintained properly. It still does nothing for you. So again, coming to the technology piece after the asset discovery, the risk assessment, the policy definition piece will provide you with a much more effective and efficient investment overall, and a much better outcome. But we see so many organisations just come straight in looking to buy technology to solve a perceived problem. The next one, and I'm sorry, Dom, to call that MSP reliance. We see a lot of times organisations, when we say, how do you manage security? The first response we get is, I outsource it all to my managed service provider, or I don't have to worry about it. That's my MSP's problem. And we hear that very, very regularly. The biggest issue here is a misalignment. What often happens is you've engaged an MSP to manage certain parts of your technology stack, but not everything. So their visibility is limited. And also, if there's no clear business context and communication around requirements for security, there's probably a misalignment or an inefficiency or ineffectiveness of your policies, your security policies. So they probably haven't configured the policies for security in the technologies that they're managing properly. Because there's just this assumption that they'll solve the problem and they'll deal with it and they know what to do. The problem is security policies need to be defined for businesses in that context, for the context of the business. For example, do we block USBs or do we enable them? Or do we block USBs but then have a process in place to allow certain approved people to use USBs on their devices? So understanding what our policies are that are relevant to our use cases. But there's this assumption that the MSP will just turn stuff on and off. And that leads to gaps, and that then ultimately leads to incidents and a little finger pointing in the process. The other issue with the MSP reliance that we often see is the expectation that there's a 24/7 response and they'll just deal with things out of hours. But again, if guide rails and authorizations haven't been established for proactive containment of incidents, the MSP may sit on something until the next day, or they might not see it themselves if they're not engaged for proper monitoring. So there's a lot of misalignment with what the managed service provider thinks they're providing to customers and what customers think they're providing to managed, what customers think they're getting from and what their expectations are of their managed service provider. The other part to this is insurance, and I haven't mentioned it, I think, on screen there, but the insurance is also critical to as a protective measure. But we often see this assumption that I've got an insurance policy. If something goes wrong, the insurance policy will cover it. Again, that's a little flawed because not all policies will respond. They certainly won't respond in the same way, and they won't necessarily always cover all of the costs, immediate or long-term, that may fall out of a major cyber incident. So that reliance, that expectation or assumption that insurance or our managed service providers have got us covered is a big issue that we see. The last one there is unprepared, and I'm not going to, I'll use the cliche, it's not if but when we have an incident. We don't see a lot of planning in terms of how will we as a business respond to this situation if we have a major breach. So again, it goes back to some of these other assumptions and some of these other mistakes that we're seeing organisations make. If we have an incident, my MSP is going to sort it out. That's a fallacy, because there's also a whole lot of stakeholder engagement, stakeholder communication, stakeholder management that needs to be maintained. There's also internal teams that need to be supporting response, customer support services that the MSP can't provide. So having a clear plan of attack for how to manage a major cyber incident, often we don't see that planning in place. And without that, that generally guarantees that if you do have an incident, it's going to be a lot longer, it's going to be a lot more expensive, and it's probably going to lead to more operational disruptions. So they're the big six, as we'll call them, that we see very, very commonly. And it's not uncommon to see all six of those with a client at any given time. So I'll move from the negative into how we work through a program to put some resilience in place. And to start with, I'll talk to some key principles, and these will be fairly obvious, I think, to most on the call today. But the first one is risks, and we'll look at risks from three different lenses: confidentiality of data, availability of data and systems, and integrity. Often we look purely, and this is where that reliance on managed service providers can come into play, very much on the availability of systems, the uptime of systems. But understanding where our risks lie across our systems and our processes, our broader business context, across confidentiality and also the integrity of data, but also and the availability of systems and data, really important concepts to be able to apply when thinking about the broader cyber problem. Don touched on people, process and technology from an IT perspective. We look at it from a security perspective as well. And we'll often look at what can we put in place to mitigate or reduce a risk? What's the lowest cost, highest return on that investment? And often it's just process changes. It's just doing things better or more consistently. Sometimes it is some technology, and sometimes it's just training of people in terms of cyber awareness. So when we're looking at our risks, we're not just looking at what's the piece of technology I can put in place to solve this problem and make it go away. We do need to look at all three lenses and obviously get the most efficiency out of it. But also when we're putting technology in, making sure to get an effective implementation, what are the processes around it to ensure that it's maintained, and how do we train people to ensure that they're using it effectively so that it does achieve its purpose. So again, it's not just turning on technology, which is one of those issues that we see quite often. And the final one is a principle I just want to call out is response plans. And you would have all heard of disaster recovery, incident response plans, and business continuity. Could take this back a slide and say one of the biggest issues we see is a disconnect between all three of those plans. If organisations actually have them, often they're disconnected. And from my personal example, many years ago, we had a cyber incident and we focused on disaster recovery, less so on the incident response, and failed to look at business continuity effectively enough. So as a result, we had a significantly worse outcome than we should have had with that business. So when you're designing your response plans, think of all three lenses: the IT, disaster recovery, how do we detect and contain cybersecurity incidents, and then how do we work in with our business continuity requirements to ensure that the business can recover and continue trading very quickly. So looking at all three of those lenses together is really, really important. So what I wanted to hopefully leave you all with today is a starting point for establishing your program, as it says on the screen, to get your house in order. Another misconception: security is really complex. I need to be a cybersecurity specialist to be able to do any of it. Or I need to be a penetration tester, an ethical hacker to be able to, to secure my systems. The reality is there's a lot of things businesses can and should do that don't necessarily need all the time engagement of cybersecurity specialists. Get them in at the right time, get them in for the right things. The counter to that will be, from a resourcing perspective, if there's constraints in terms of being able to handle the workload. But what I'll walk through here is a journey that, if it was me in your organisation coming in to look after your cyber, or how we engage with clients ongoing as virtual CISO, this is the general journey we'd start off with to make sure that we've got a baseline of resilience. And the first thing is a gap assessment. We want to know where we are today. We just need a stake in the ground somewhere, so we understand what we have today and what we don't have, against something of a framework that can give us a pathway forward. So it gives us a view of maturity, and again, across people, process, and maturity, just to understand what we have. But that also helps build a plan of attack moving forward. But moving forward from that, the next step I would be doing is opening an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Sheets, and I'll be mapping out everything I have. Hardware, software, information assets. So what types of information do we have? Where do we have it? What are our obligations for security? So look at our legal and regulatory obligations. Have a look at contracts, material contracts at the very least. Have we got a customer that's defined in the contract what we need to demonstrate, or what we need to have in place to protect their information? Map it out. It'll soon give us a bit of a lens of what do we actually need to think about here? What do we need to make sure we have in place? And the last one is cloud solutions. And in simple terms, what websites do you use? And that list can become quite onerous, because once you start to audit and speak to people within the organisation, you start to realise how easy it is to set up and sign up for web applications, and then start to share our company information out into the cloud. So mapping out as much as possible what we have, how it all is interrelated, interconnected, because at that point it'll do two things. It sets the scene for everything else that we're about to do. It'll help us realise how broad our scope is, but you'll also start thinking logically around what can go wrong, what are my issues, what are my real risks. And that's before we've started to invest in any technical tools or anything like that. So just really deep level understanding of what we've got and where it is and what it has in it. This next step is counterintuitive to what most cyber security programs would tell you. The next thing they'd say is map your assets and then do a risk assessment. I flip it a little bit because I can promise you one of your top 2 risks in your risk assessment will tell you you've got a problem with access reviews. To that earlier point around inaccurate access controls. I would take my lists and I'd pause and I'd do a really detailed analysis of who's got what access to what systems, what software, what websites, what information. Because at this point, 99% of the time when we do user access reviews, we find that a terminated employee from 6 months ago has still got an active account with a platform that hasn't been shut down. So we'll see gaps in processes at this point in terms of offboarding. When somebody leaves the organisation, maybe we haven't got a comprehensive enough list to make sure we turn off all access. So we see some gaps and issues and we can fix them straight away. We also remove some of that obvious risk. But at the same time as we're doing that, looking at what's the password policies for those systems, is multi-factor authentication turned on consistently? Is it enforced? Are our people trained well enough on how to use passwords? Have we given them a password vault to manage passwords so that they don't reuse passwords? Have we implemented the right, this is where we get to tooling, have we implemented the right tools to support easier access management, more effective and more secure access management for our people? But have we established the processes and done the training to make sure that those tools are being used effectively? So I would do a really deep dive into what I just call access, identity and access management, whatever terminology you want to give to this phase. But that's a big risk for all organisations, just given the nature of how we work, and that's where I'd be starting. At that point, I'd then start to get into the more, say, traditional, the more formalised processes within good cyber governance, risk and compliance, and I'd do that risk assessment. As I said, we do this after the access control because by default, we know that's a major risk. This is the point in time where I'd do a penetration test. A lot of companies will come to us and say, can you do a penetration test as the first step? And that's often where they start as a substitute for a gap assessment. The problem is often they're doing a penetration test on a low risk asset or a low value asset. So they haven't really done it against something that's genuinely of risk. So the point of a penetration test is to assess whether we're susceptible to a cyber attack, essentially, of our technology assets. And really, when you do it in conjunction with a risk assessment, you're assessing what's the likelihood that this risk will be felt or will occur. So we do the penetration test at this stage to understand how big a risk it is that we might get hacked as one of our many risks. So that at this point, also the penetration test will give you more value because you know what you're testing. You've mapped out what you have, you know where your assets are, you know where your data is, you know what's sensitive, you know what's critical to your business. This is a much better way to go. You might also realise that a penetration test is of no value to you because you only have a brochureware website with no company or client data in it. You might find that at this point you're more likely to do a review of your Microsoft configurations against best practice to make sure the security settings for your Microsoft 365 or your Google cloud environment are established correctly. So you'll focus the money or the investment on the right assessment at this point in time. Moving on, we now know what our biggest risks are. We've done some testing to see how likely some of these are to be realised. we're starting to now treat those risks. And at this point, that's where we're starting to map the people, process, and technology. How can I bring this risk down? Do I have to spend money on technology? Can I just fix a process, or can I do better training with my people? But at this point, we're looking at what can we do to bring down the likelihood of these risks, and in some cases, the consequence. It might be that your risk reduction is just we need to delete data from our systems. We've got data sitting there that we just don't need, and that's exposing us. So you're investing the time and energy and the investment on the right things. It's at this point that I'd now start to define policies. Once you've got to this point of the journey, you're going to be pretty clear on what you have, who's got access to it, what are our risks, what are the controls that we've got in place to manage these risks, and you can start to document policies. Again, what we often get is clients coming to us saying, I need an information security policy, but without any scope or context. Often they're looking for just a template that they can do a find and replace on for the company name and then publish it to staff. Happens a lot. The issues with that are a couple. One is if it doesn't align to actual business practices, staff will just ignore it because it doesn't make any sense. Whereas if you build one that's bespoke based on the inputs from these prior processes, you'll get one that staff absolutely understand because it's already been trained into them, and therefore you'll get a much better compliance against your policies. And the second one is if you are planning to go on a journey to certification to a framework like ISO 27001, as soon as you get to the audit phase, the auditor will see that you have just got a template policy and it doesn't align with actual practices. So there's a concept at this point to call out that auditors will always look for. Say what you do, write what you do what you write. And template policies, whilst they're free and they're easy and you can quickly update them with your company name, typically won't give you any benefit from a security or a compliance perspective. So I'd be defining my policies after all of these processes are done because I'll have a really clear view of what needs to go in them at this point. Last two. Develop your incident response and business continuity plans. At this point, we know what we've got, we know who our stakeholders are, we know how it's protected. We can start to build out a plan of if something does get through all of those controls, how would we deal with it? How would we respond to it? But I'd also be building business continuity plans in alignment at the same time so that if a cyber incident starts to become disruptive to normal operations, you know how to escalate to business continuity and how that changes your response and how the teams interact and manage and how you manage the well-being of people across an extended outage. So I'd be focusing on building response plans generally at this point in time with those inputs. And then at this point, I'd be moving towards potentially getting a certification. And it might be, again, I use ISO 27001 as the most common one, but that's a really popular one. You might at this point start to think about getting certification, and certification is not a sign that you are secure. It's more validation that you've got a robust program in place to manage risks as you can identify them, to maintain and manage them within levels of tolerance. So it's not a validation. I should say it's not confirmation of security, it's validation of the program. And again, one of the issues we see with that compliance focus from that earlier slide is that clients will come in and say, I need to get ISO 27001 certified, which is fine, and we take people on that journey. But if you want a secure or a resilient outcome, I would suggest focusing the energy on the risk side of things before even thinking about what do I need to do to tick the box to get the certificate. So if you go through this journey and then you get to the end, you'll be able to say, okay, I'm 90% of the way there. It's just a little bit of tweaking to get it to that final step. Just the last point that I wanted to touch on, and I'm sure everyone is aware of Cyber Essentials on the call. I've spoken to ISO 27001, and apologies, there is a lot of text on this slide. So I don't plan to read that to you. All I wanted to call out and highlight is Cyber Essentials is, as the name suggests, the fundamentals to protecting corporate assets, technology assets. It doesn't go to the broader level of understanding our risk, managing how we do incident response, how we do risk management, and so on. It looks very specifically at domains like firewalls, secure configuration, how we do patching, how we do user access control, and how we protect our devices from malware. So it's really narrow, fundamental controls, and they do map back into ISO 27001. But ISO 27001 is a broader governance framework, which will give you a much more structured approach to overseeing security risk. And again, I won't go into the specifics on that slide, but often we find organisations in the UK particularly start with Cyber Essentials and then will evolve to ISO 27001. There's no right or wrong. They're both very valid frameworks to align to because they both provide something very, very different, but complementary at the same time. And then just finally, there are other frameworks. I'm sure you may have heard of a few of these on screen. The point, I guess, to make here is when you start off and you say, where do I start? What framework do I align to? Do I get a gap assessment against? There's not really a right or wrong answer. It is driven by your business context and appetite, and also your obligations, very much your obligations. You know, what those drivers are is something that we'll always explore very early on. I think with that, I'm going to pause, given time, and hand back to you, Dom, to see if there's any questions. Hopefully that gives a little bit of value there for everyone to start the journey.
Thanks, Alex. It's really appreciated. If anyone wants a copy of the slides, anything like that, then please do let us know. And there is a recording available, as I said. Are there any questions at all from any of the participants? Well, give it another minute. Okay, one's come in there. Yeah, I'm going to read these straight out to you, being the expert in the room. So, Alex, what is cybersecurity maturity and how is it measured?
Yeah, so that's a good one. So maturity is, we often think of compliance, and we often just see compliant or non-compliant, but another lens to look at it from, and we look at this a lot in security reviews against certain frameworks, but it's maturity levels showing a reflection of your resilience, basically. There's levels to it. It's not just right or wrong, yes or no, compliant, not compliant. So it provides or it reflects how your organisation can protect your assets, detect breaches, respond to incidents, and so on. And the most common one we use is 5 levels that works from 0 to 5, which suggests that at level 0 you have nothing, through to level 5 you're gold standard, optimizing your defense level, basically. Often what we see is organizations are sort of levels 1 to 2. Level 1 to 2 means, level 1 means you're repeatable. You've got certain controls in place, but you've got gaps, but there's nothing standardized. You're not following standard approaches. You haven't got a lot of documentation. You've got the fundamentals in place. But then we go to the next level, which is defined, which is where there's a bit more standardization to processes and there's more documentation. So the whole concept of maturity is around, I guess, giving us a journey to go on, because we can't go from having nothing to being defense standard overnight. And it just provides us with a way to work our levels across the security frameworks, or across the security stack, I should say.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Another one's come in. I can answer that one. It says, what are the pricing structures? it really depends on the requirement of the organisation where you are on that journey, as Alex has just kind of talked about. So it can vary quite a lot, but there are some pricing structures in place. Please do connect with us afterwards, speak to your account manager, and we can run through those with you separately. But yeah, we need a little basic understanding of where the organisation is at the moment before really being able to give an exact answer on that.
Probably, sorry, Dom, I'll just add to that. Probably depends. It depends a lot on the activity. Like, is it a gap assessment? What's the scope of the gap assessment? What's the complexity of the organisation? Is it a risk assessment? What's the scope? It could be just a simple vendor risk assessment for you, or it could be a whole company cyber risk assessment across the organisation. So, yeah, to your point, it really comes down to scope and context.
Thank you very much. Another one's coming. What risks do we need to consider in 2024? Is there anything new that people should be aware of?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll break it down to common, and I'll break it then into the ones that are, say, overlooked or are the priority new ones coming to the surface that we don't consistently see people or organisations addressing. So the common ones are the obvious malware, phishing, social engineering, denial of service, the insider threats, and then you've got things like zero-day exploits. These are all the things that our security awareness and training programs hopefully mitigate, and also our antivirus solutions, and also our firewalls and some of those other technology solutions manage for us. The ones that are so overlooked or should be prioritised now, the biggest one is third party and supply chain. It comes back to how many sites we like signing into, or how much external access we're providing to our systems and our data. So looking at third party and supply chain risks is probably the biggest one at the moment. Internet of Things, IoT devices, OT, that's it. That's a huge area of gap. I mentioned earlier cloud security misconfigurations. Properly assessing the configuration of your Google or Microsoft environments. We see a lot of gaps there. Just again, comes back probably mostly to the fact that there's a reliance or an expectation that MSPs dealt with it. And the other one is shadow IT, which kind of touches back on that third party risk. They're the big ones. And the final one would be APIs, application program interfaces. So that's the connections between all your systems, where you're starting to share data between all your cloud systems. A lot of breaches are starting to occur at that level.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think leading on from that, are there any technologies that you see coming out that may revolutionise how organisations approach cybersecurity?
Yeah, it's a really good one. AI is obviously the topic, isn't it? Right? It's all around AI. Will it revolutionise security? I think it just changes the plane that we're playing on, because AI is equally useful to the attackers as it may be to us in a defence mode. So AI is certainly going to have a significant impact. The challenge we have is the regulations of it, and obviously there's a lot of work that's come out of the UK around the governance around AI and regulation, safe use of AI. So I think AI is probably the big item there. The challenge we have is that while on the good side we'll follow those governance principles and guidelines, how do we control the attackers that maybe don't have the ethical values that the rest of us have, and don't follow those while building their solutions to be able to attack us? So I think, unfortunately, the revolution for security is a negative revolution in some ways if that's not controlled properly.
Perfect. Thank you very much. It looks like all the questions that we're going to get in for now. If anyone does have any questions afterwards, then yes, please do. As I said, email your account manager, email ourselves on the invite that you got sent. But thank you so much for taking the time out this morning and for tuning in. We'll be in touch with future webinars and other topics. And if there's any suggestions, please shoot them across. But other than that, have a great day, everyone. And thank you very much. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everyone.